Hello, I'm Helen King, and I'm going to do a few podcasts on the history of cancer. My background is a historian of medicine and a classicist, but I'm also interested in medicine just as a patient, as we all are. So this one, I want to talk about what is the history of cancer. And I think that's actually quite a complicated question, but it's one which involves us thinking about how we use evidence, and that's always really important. So why do we want to have a history for any disease? Why do we need a history? So I think there's something here about continuity, about reassurance. We want a disease to have a history because it's a bit like when you're a patient, you go to see a medical professional and you want to know that you're not the only person in the world who's ever had that thing. So you want a name for your condition. That's reassuring. It means you're not the only person who's ever had it, but it also means there's likely to be some research on it. There's likely to be some treatments for it. There's likely to be something people can do to help you. But that's sort of more about getting a name for a disease than about actually having a history for it. I think names and history are very closely connected though. So as an example, if you go to your medical practitioner with an embarrassing sort of pain down below, and you're told you've got proctalgia fugax, you think, that's great, I've got something with a name. But actually what you're being told there is nothing that you didn't know already. Proctalgia fugax literally means a shooting pain in your butt. So the proctos bit, bottom, algia bit comes from a Greek word for pain, as in analgesic, against pain. And fugax just means fleeting, flying away. So proctalgia fugax, fleeting pain in the butt. It's a name, it's got Greek and it's got Latin, and that makes it sound sort of impressive, but actually you're not finding out anything you didn't know already. What about the name cancer then? Cancer, you'll read everywhere online, comes from the ancient Greek and Latin words for crab. So in Greek, it's karkinos, as in our carcinoma, and in Latin it's cancer, crab. The use of the word in medicine, the crab word, goes back to Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, lots of scare quotes there, who lived in the 5th century BCE. But of course, in those days, there was no knowledge of how the body worked. There was no knowledge of cells and their structure and how cells change. There were no diagnostic tests, so we can't say if we find the crab word in an ancient medical text, oh, that's definitely cancer. There's no way of knowing. We don't have access to the patient's tissue in that way. So finding the crab word is no guarantee that the text is about cancer. But if you look into cancer history, you'll find that cancer specialists really want to find cases of it in the past. They need a history, and I think that's more about their reputation and their confidence than it is about just finding a word. They need a sense of a lineage of noble physicians fighting to find a cure to help patients. And a sense of progress in which even if some of the patients that people have now will die, nevertheless, there's a sense that in the past, fewer would have died. Sorry, more would have died in the past. Fewer are dying today because we've made progress. And I think history is often important to that too, to get that sense of progress. And I think we as patients also need a sense of progress. Things have got better. So cancer gets a history, and it's really worth doing this if you haven't done it already, just going online and searching for history of cancer and seeing what you get. You might find it's quite surprising. You'll find it's linked to the name of Hippocrates, but also to the names of other famous doctors of the past, so Galen and Celsus. But keep in mind, as you do this, that there's no way of knowing that those crab words meant what we would call cancer. And then today, is there even one thing called cancer? We probably emphasize today the different types, the different causes, the different stages. We would not simply say, oh, it's all cancer, in quite the way that the history sites want you to do. Let's just take one form, breast cancer, as an example. If you search online, you'll find that you're told that breast cancer has a really long history. And you'll find many, many sites which trace that back to ancient Egypt. they'll talk about something called the Edwin Smith papyrus. That's a papyrus, it's a written material that dates back to someone called Edwin Smith who discovered it. And that supposedly tells you about using cauterization to treat breast cancer. The general history of cancer sites are often run by medical professionals, and they will go along with that idea of a long history. They'll mention Egypt. If you look instead at experts on ancient Egyptian medicine, specialist historians, they'll see something rather different in the same material. A chap called John Nunn, who was between the two worlds of medicine and history, he was a retired anesthesiologist. He wrote a book in 1996 called Ancient Egyptian Medicine, which is still the sort of go-to book for this topic. He pointed out we wouldn't actually expect as much cancer in ancient Egypt because lack of triggers in the environment, but also because people just didn't live long enough to get it. You have to live to a certain length to get some sorts of cancer, and people just didn't live long enough. He also said that in the skeletal record, cancer was very rare, although actually that's complicated too, because he talked about bone cancer as something you could find in the skeletal record, so evidence of a damage to a bone from a tumour that's pressing on it. But also there's an important factor he wrote in 1996, and in the 90s, we didn't have such sophisticated ways of finding evidence in skeletal material. So from the early 21st century onwards, we can find quite small tumours. We can see evidence of spread. And I've directed you in the reading that accompanies this to a couple of sites that talk about ancient Egyptian skeletal remains, which we now can say do have evidence of cancers we can identify. But specifically, what about that Edwin Smith papyrus? A quick online search will probably tell you that there's 48 cases described in it, 48 either individuals or conditions, and that there are 8 cases of cancer. But is it that simple? Now, you can find out for yourself. This is great. There is an online version of the 1930 translation of the Edwin Smith papyrus that includes really detailed notes on all the different Egyptian words that were actually used in this text. So you don't have to believe people who just say, oh, the Edwin Smith papyrus tells you about cancer. You can read it for yourself. So there are certainly 8 cases of conditions that affect the chest area. And one, case number 45, tells you that if there are swellings over the breast area and they're cool, they're bulging, and they're spread over a large area, then there is no treatment. Now, some modern sites will make that sound really doom-laden. There is no treatment. But actually, within the papyrus generally, there is no treatment is used for several different conditions. It's not just to do with this particular possible cancer, possibly not description. Also, some of the English translations of the ancient Egyptian use the word swellings here. Others use the word tumours. And as soon as you translate the ancient Egyptian word as tumours, you're making it sound much more like it's cancer. So remember, as ever, every act of translation is also an act of interpretation. The next case, case 46 in the papyrus, is an abscess. It's an abscess that's developed a clear head. It's come to a point. So it's what happens when there's an infection, and so there's a lot of pus in it, and it's under pressure, and it forms this head. It's inflamed. So is that cancer, or is it an abscess, a localized skin infection? We can't know, but the decision to decide to say it's cancer is part of trying to get a long history for the condition. So it's probably not 8 cases of cancer, may not be any cases of cancer in the Edwin Smith papyrus. And whatever they are, all these conditions are actually in men, and that surely must influence how we interpret them. Plenty of ulcers and swellings and cysts and abscesses and so on, but no mention of the disease of cancer. There's another ancient Egyptian text which comes up, which is called the Ebers papyrus, and that has something called eating of the uterus. And that again has been interpreted as a very advanced cancer of the womb. We don't know. Now, in your online search for the history of cancer, you'll find various images with titles like The Evolution of Breast Cancer 3500 BC to 2016, which will include an arrow that's sort of going up as part of the chart. For both medical professionals trying to treat cancer and for patients looking for cure, knowing a disease has a history is very comforting, and we like that upward trajectory in which things are getting better and better, even if they're not perfect yet. We live in a world of changing theories. Over history, breast cancer has been seen as being caused by black bile, by a clot of lymph, by not enough sex, by your genes, by your environment, and cures have changed too. Tests have changed, mammography, genetic tests, radical mastectomy or lumpectomy as treatments, radiotherapy, chemotherapy. But we still want a history, and we still want it to go back as far as possible, hence all these references to ancient Egypt. The part of developing a sense of progress is having something that's actually worse than the present that you can progress from. Next time I'll be returning to the very early history, but focusing on changing ideas of causation of cancer, and also the evidence we have for early patient experiences. So look forward to that.